Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you live. If you have decided to use this webinar as a asynchronous resource, we are glad you're here too. You're at Universally Designing Assessments webinar for the CESIL Project, California Coalition for Inclusive Learning. Today, we plan to share the distinction between traditional and universally designed assessments, as well as help you understand why universally designing assessments is inclusive and effective. If you haven't already, if you can grab the link through the chat, the bit.ly link, bit.ly universal assessments, that's going to take you to the Google Doc, and the Google Doc contains the slides that we'll be using to present, as well as other resources that you can access after the webinar. Also, if you prefer to scan, there's the QR code there for you to scan. CESIL leadership is made possible with the partnership by the partnership with CDE, CCEE, and the grantee of the CESIL project, Placer County Office of Education. Our partners in this work is Fresno County Superintendent of Schools, followed by these county offices. We have Los Angeles County, San Joaquin, Santa Clara County, Sonoma County, and the two GEO leads, Valley to Coast Collaborative, as well as Capital Central Foothill Area Consortium. I am excited to be presenting today with Jessica Peterson, but let me start by introducing myself. My name is Brenda Green. I am based in Los Angeles, California, and I am an implementation specialist at CAS. So I primarily support Los Angeles County Office of Education, as well as Santa Clara with the implementation of UDL. And when I'm not doing work under the CESIL grant, I am facilitating PL across the US to leaders, educators, on helping them understand how they would implement UDL. So I'll kick it off to Jessica to introduce herself.
Hello, welcome. I am Jessica Peterson. I work for the Office of the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. I am an educational technology coordinator under the STEM department, but also over the last 4 years, I have also supported districts with the CESIL grant, and I'm very excited that you're here.
All right, so to make this webinar experience more engaging, we will invite you to introduce yourself, ask a question, share an idea, or share a link to a resource that could be helpful for us to understand more how we would go about universally designing assessments. If you want to send a message directly to either the panelists or the attendees, please be sure to add their name to respond. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, this link here that you see at the bottom of the screen is going to take you to this Google Doc. So here's a snapshot of the Google Doc. And then you see the slides and other additional resources that follow this webinar if you wish to further explore these topics. Also, if you want to take notes on this presentation, feel free to copy the slides as well so you can make it your own. All right, so our goals for today. Participants will be able to, so we want you to be able to distinguish between traditional and universally designed assessments, as well as understand why universally designed assessments are inclusive and effective. So before I move on, I would like you to take a moment to think about what your personal goal is for today. Feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can just simply write it down. But I would like to give you some time to write down a goal that you have for today as we progress you through this webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the chat because I would love to see your goals if any of you share. All right, so while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and continue on. Okay, sorry. All right, so before we begin, I want to define UDL. So Universal Design for Learning is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by one, setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize those barriers. So there are three foundational principles, the top half of the screen, and that is the barrier is in the design, not the learner. Variability is the norm. It is contextual, it can be planned for, and the goal of UDL is learner agency. Since we'll be talking about the how of universally designed assessments, I want to review the UDL design process as well. So that is to set clear, rigorous goals, anticipate variability, and design options to minimize barriers. So connected to variability, this is one of the foundational principles. We know that students vary in the way their interests, effort, and resilience, as well as their emotional well-being, so the way in which they engage. We know students vary in how they want information represented, so how they perceive content, language skills, as well as background information. And we know that students vary in the way that they show what they know and can be able to do. So their physical navigation skills, so how are they leveraging the learning space to get what they need, so they're able to work towards learning goals, as well as communication skills and executive function skills. And so to the right, you see there's an image with a learner. Down the middle is a vertical line that represents the average. And so you see a jagged line there, and that represents the variability in the low and the high in terms of her skills. All right, so in terms of barriers, another foundational principle to UDL, barriers may exist in these design areas. So we call these our design areas in UDL. So the goals, what will guide instruction, minimize barriers to learning, motivate students, and foster learner agency. Materials, how is the content being represented? Methods, how is the content being delivered? Assessment, which is what we're going to focus on today. How is the learning being demonstrated? And then, of course, environment. How is the climate culture supportive of the learning? So we call these the design areas when we look to designing learning experiences for students. So in this case, we'll be talking about assessments, but you can look to these buckets when you're trying to open up access to your assessments and make them more inclusive. And so lastly, we talked about design options for all. So this takes me to the UDL guidelines. So quickly, the UDL guidelines, common instructional language. It's a summary of learner variability, summary of research, tools for anticipating barriers, and guidance for design. And I also like to say redesign, because we have lessons that we have. And so I would hope that with the UDL guidelines, you would take a look at your lessons and see, how could I now look at this under the lens of UDL and make this, this lesson design more inclusive. If you want to access the UDL guidelines, there is a link in the notes if you have the slides open, and then we'll put the link in the chat as well. All right, so why a UDL lens for assessment? So let's talk about this. So before we begin, I want to highlight that writing, of course, is a common traditional method that we use as educators for students to show us what they know and show us what they're able to do. So this is a video that where a student highlights her experiences when she has to write to show what she knows. And so as I'm playing this, what I like for you to do, you can do it during the video or after the fact, but I want you to respond to the question, what barriers have you seen students experience in your classroom related to their assessment? So I want you to begin thinking about that and holding on to those thoughts as we progress throughout the presentation. So let me start the video.
My name is Lucy. I'm in the 5th grade, and writing is a huge struggle. I would have the whole thing written out in my head. Martin Luther King was a great man who helped lots of people in many ways. But the act of writing that thing, that paragraph, is excruciatingly hard. So, eager to get my ideas out there, I used to skip words. It wouldn't make sense. It'd be Martin Luther King, great man. When I was done, it'd be I couldn't even read it myself. Is that a J or an F? I'd hope the teachers wouldn't read mine because I knew that everyone else had written a paragraph and I had written 3 sentences. I was trying my very hardest, yet I just couldn't do it.
Writing can be challenging for all students, but for kids whose brains are wired differently, it can be especially difficult. As students get older, writing becomes a bigger part of their lives at school, and for some students, that's the worst part of the day because they know their work doesn't measure up to their friends. Writing involves mastering so many skills, coming up with ideas, organizing your thoughts, choosing each word, using punctuation, and spelling everything correctly. It's one of the most complex things that we ask children to do. So we need to give students a lot of support. Kids can get started by narrating an essay first instead of writing it. Using voice-to-text software or just dictating can help a lot. And it gets some words down on paper, a huge step for many kids. Once we have that first draft, we can work with students to develop revision strategies so they can start making progress on their spelling, grammar, word choices, and story structure. With practice, writing can evolve from being a big, scary headache into a skill that our children can master one small step at a time.
What I find helps, especially for me, cursive. Because with print, I used to forget what I was writing halfway through a word. Since in cursive, it's all one fluid motion, you can just write it. And since it's faster, I can get my ideas out there faster. With writing, one thing that helped me was to be able to organize my ideas with something called a graphic organizer. It's just a page of paper that has a spot for a topic, a spot for certain ideas, key ideas, some details about those key ideas, and a conclusion. We were writing reviews about a granola bar we had made ourselves. I was writing and I finished and I showed it to my teacher and he looked at it for a few minutes and then came over to our table and said, "Lucy, this looks like I'm reading something a food critic wrote." And I was like, "Thank you."
All right, so I want to hear your thoughts or reactions to the video. So if you don't have the privilege of working with learners and you're not in the classroom, maybe you can reflect on what you saw here in the video. But what barriers have you seen students experience in your classroom related to their assessments?
Hi, everyone. This is Shamron here coming to you from Placer County Office of Education, part of the Cecil Project. I'm seeing some great things pop up into the chat, but this video really rings true for experiences that I had both as a teacher and a leader at the school site. And I remember having conversations with teachers of frustrated students where, just like Lucy said, I've got such big ideas, I just can't get them out of my head and onto the paper fast enough. And so it was really great to hear about some of the strategies that she talked about that worked for her. I was really surprised to hear that she loved cursive. I know, do we teach cursive anymore? So a lot of the things that we're already doing in our classrooms are really having an impact on that. So A few of the other things that I see are getting elevated into the chat is what Jody says. So often they know the content, but they're unable to read it. There's a lot of truth to that one. Functional application of writing, finishing within the timeline or before the end of class, organizing text is really difficult. Students who are not sure how to get started when given a writing prompt, they can freeze. Yeah, so overwhelming to have such a big topic there. Background knowledge, vocabulary. Richard shares, I mainly see the classrooms that I assist the mediums in which the curriculum is given to the students. So those buckets that you were talking about earlier, Brenda, the materials, the methods, the assessments, the environment. Timed test is never going to be a stress-free situation from my partner, Elisa here. Lots of great ideas and experiences that are surfacing in the chat. Spelling is a huge one. I think, Jessica, before we jumped on, you were sharing about your experience in doing spelling as a classroom teacher as well. So great to see all of these. Inability to understand what's required of the task. Is it only presented in one medium? So clear goal, flexible means. Were we clear on what we wanted our learners to do and share? And you know, what is the purpose of writing in the first place? So excited to see all the thinking of what's going on with our participants in the chat, and welcome to everybody as well.
All right, so let's move on. Again, thank you for sharing that. Because those ideas that you share, there's a common theme here. And what I see is obviously students' language skills. So we know that, again, writing to show what you know is a common traditional method we use to assess students. And so we also know that the language skills that students bring to us or bring to the assessment experience will impact their ability to show what they know and can be able to do, right? So when we think about universally designing assessments, we want to consider how might we think of options that we can plan or provide for students that account for the variability in language, right? So that we're able to make sure that if the goal is for students to show us how they're tracking toward their learning goal, right? Then we need to be able to respond to the language, right? So for example, if we consider, students writing to show what they learned, are there any options we can build in for students to verbally show what they know, create a video, right? Is that opportunity available for students, right? Also, when we consider students having to be able to read an assessment item to make meaning, are there opportunities where we can embed audio so that students have that option so that they're able to perceive the information and understand what it is, because that's step one. They need to understand what's being asked of them before they even show you, right, what they know. All right. So universally designed assessment. So let's talk a little bit about what they are. So this is a definition that you will see if you've been in our CAS materials, whether it's text, links you follow, videos. This is the way we define assessment. So assessment is the technique we use to find the information we need to understand what happened and what we can do to help. So assessments help reveal where students are and where we need to go. Okay, so the types of assessments, two main types here. We have summative assessment. So this is nothing brand new that you've seen this before. Chapter tests, end of unit assessments, final exams, end of course, state assessments, and we know these are given less frequently, but there are additional opportunities for students if we consider formative assessments, right? And we know that formative assessments, they're shorter and more frequent. It helps us determine gaps in learning, and the data is used to inform teaching practices to support student learning. So what does that look like in terms of, if we're giving formative assessments, there are questions about the content, Engagement is a big part of UDL, so questions about the student's emotional state, because we want students to be engaged in the learning process, so it's important to connect with students, right? Formative assessment can be seen in student work, captured in student discussion, feedback between students and teachers, as well as, and this is very important and key, ongoing and embedded effort to gather information about student learning. So again, if we know the goal of UDL is learner agency, we need to provide additional assessment items so we can learn from the learners, but more importantly, we want the students to begin to learn more about themselves as learners. So providing ongoing and embedded formative assessments will help us reach that goal. So what are some questions we can consider when we are universally designing assessments? One, how is the assessment linked to the learning goal? So that's very important. Jessica is going to talk a little bit later about this idea of making sure that we're our assessment items when we're evaluating, what is its connection to the learning goal? What barriers might students experience? So you flood the chat with many things that students may experience, right, in terms of barriers. And then how does the assessment engage the learner? So in terms of the UDL guidelines, so this is where we would look to help us think of more options, right? In terms of engagement, and if we want students, we want students to have choice when they are launching into a assessment task, right? So that they will be able to show us again what they know and what they're able to do. We also want to have this balance of challenge and support. So we don't want to, have students not able to feel that they're unable to complete the task, right? We want to challenge them, but we also want them to have the support they need. So, we talked about Lucy was talking about her writing challenges, right? So if we have students with writing challenges, how can we provide that challenge and support the language skills that she would need, right, to get through the task? And then a key feature of assessments is providing feedback, right? So we want students to be able to have assessments so they can get feedback, but we also need feedback as well as teachers so that we're able to make adjustments to our assessment design. In terms of representation, building knowledge, right? So obviously it's our goal that when kids assess, we would hope that they would bring in their prior knowledge, right, to a new learning experience, right? And we also would want to see, based on how our assessments are set up, evidence of students connecting big ideas, seeing the relationships between what they learned previously to new information. And more importantly, we want the assessment to show some evidence of transfer of knowledge, right? So students, based on what they learn, we know learning happens if students are able to transfer what they have learned or show evidence of it to new and unique context. And then in terms of action and expression, design considerations here. Now, there's a lot here, but we know that students assessing, it is an act of expressing what they know. So a lot of considerations here, but thinking back to those design areas, we want to be sure that students can access the materials, right? Whatever we're assessing them on, access the assessment. But furthermore, if they need special tools to complete that assessment, that's made available to them. When we think about expression and communication, again, providing multiple ways students can demonstrate, so whether that's creating a product or we provide them an assessment, they have that option to do so. But I think I want to highlight the very bottom bullet here, addressing biases. I know that going into education, there were times where, you have your assessments, common assessments, district assessments, and they are how they are, right? But stepping outside of those usual techniques for assessing, I want to challenge us to think about what are some other ways that students can show or express what they know, and they can pick a way in which they communicate that to you. And then, of course, for strategy development, enhanced capacity for monitoring progress. So lots of opportunity to provide formative assessment so that students are able to learn more what they need to do to monitor their progress. So these are just some considerations that I've highlighted, but there might be others on the UDL guidelines that you can consider when you're building out your assessments. So just a few tips. So tips to make assessment experiences more inclusive for learners, right? Align assessments with learning goals, provide multiple ways for learners to show what they know, look for potential barriers to assessment, look for informal assessment opportunities, provide frequent, timely doses of feedback. And of course, we should never underestimate the student voice. So we heard from Lucy, right? It shocked me as well. Cursive was her thing, but options can be suggested by students. Okay. If you want to know a little bit more about assessment, I understand this webinar is just 1 hour. These are some videos here that you can look at to further explore what assessment looks like within your grade band. These links are also included on the Google Doc that you accessed earlier when we opened up the presentation. But I want to just offer that to you. If there's, again, something more you want to know, please visit or go to these links. Also, the UDL assessment playbook. What we discussed today that document goes in more detail about what we discussed. So I also want to encourage you to do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Jessica. She's going to talk more about the how of universally designed assessments.
Thank you, Brenda. So now we're going to just kind of look at how might I get started? How might I get started universally designing assessments? And within the UDL assessment playbook, we are going to actually watch a video on this next slide of construct and constructee relevant features. This was a video that I found as I was taking a group of teachers, educators from one district that I'm supporting. They decided to look through the lens as we thought about the 4 different areas, right? So the methods, materials, the environment, and assessment. They decided to start with assessment. And this was a video that I found very helpful as we started to go through assessment and really building their capacity of where might we start, because sometimes it can feel overwhelming. We have all these assessments we're supposed to give. How do I get started with universally designing them? So we're going to go ahead and watch this video. It's just a small section of a very long video, but it's an amazing piece.
This video is about empowering teachers. Yes, we want those of you who have to use assessment in your classroom all the time to understand how assessment people think, so you can evaluate when assessment is working and when it's not, and where exactly the breakdown is happening. Think about driving a car. You might learn to drive the car to get around from point A to B. And most of the time, you don't need to know how to change the oil or fix a flat tire. But if you know these things, then you really know your car and you know how it's put together. Except in this case, what we are going to do is expose the assessment engine so that we can understand how it runs. Right. Understanding how things works always helps. So let's get started. We want to use assessments to find out where kids are and how they learn best, and what we can design to support their learning. Closely evaluating the assessments will give us that information to do that. When evaluating assessments, one of the first items we need to focus on is understanding construct. Assessments are designed to measure knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? Constructs are the knowledge, skills, or abilities being measured by an assessment item. Seems very straightforward. We want assessments to measure evidence of how well students have achieved or made progress toward the learning goal. Exactly. The problem is many assessment items include features, information, requirements, big words that are not relevant to understanding the student's knowledge, skill, or ability. Very often, the methods or materials used in assessment demand additional skills or understanding not directly connected to what's being measured or tested. These are considered to be construct irrelevant. Construct irrelevant features can create barriers for some students, preventing an accurate measurement of the construct that the teacher wants to measure. Basically, construct irrelevant features can impact students' ability to show what they really know or what they can really do. Yes, for example, consider a math assessment that includes word problems to assess a student's understanding of a math concept. In this case, the ability to read fluently is construct irrelevant, meaning it's separate from the ability to do math problems and calculations. The barrier may be in the student's reading ability and not in their math ability.
Thank you, Brenda. And so I just want you to take a minute and drop in the chat, just in your own words, I would love for you to define construct or construct irrelevant. So we just watched that clip of construct and construct irrelevant. And if you could just drop in the chat in your own words, what do either one of those words mean to you? Go ahead and open up the chat.
Brenda,
Yes.
you go ahead. I'm muted.
Go.
Can you go? It's not working.
Go.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yay, we figured it out. We're sitting right next to each other. Sorry, everyone.
For years of the pandemic, still haven't figured this out. A couple of things. Let's escape so that we have a larger size of the slide. And as our colleagues are thinking about it either asynchronously or here with us today, thinking about construct can be as complex as thinking about the content of mathematics or history, social science, because my background is secondary, so that's where I'm going. So I know, Jessica, you're going to provide with us some examples on the primary grades, but for those of you that I see that we have some paraprofessionals that are here with us and some higher ed folks, some of this language would be natural. So think about what are the stretch points? What are the areas that I might have considered there was a construct in there that might have been embedded because that's how we've always done it. And so what else might we think about today that'll stretch us towards that? Thank you.
I'm seeing lots of things pop up in the chat. What is the heart of the assignment? If it's spelling, then grade the spelling. If it's story components, don't worry about spelling. Richard writes, manipulative, does it meet the goal or not? Or when there are barriers that are not related to what's being measured. I often think of it as it being something that the way the assessment is designed or the construct of the assessment itself getting in the way of what it is I'm actually measuring. Is it extra or is it dialed down to what it is I'm actually examining?
Thank you, Shamron.
Of
Thank you those
course.
that provided your definition in the chat. I appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. And construct is the knowledge, skills, and abilities being measured by an assessment. Okay, but construct irrelevant features can create barriers for some students preventing an accurate measurement of the construct. She gives a great example of a math test, right? And there's word problems there. The reading of the word problem could be a barrier, and that is construct irrelevant because really we want to know, can they solve the problem? Do they understand the math concepts to solve that mathematical problem? But the reading of the problem could pose a barrier for some students, not all, but maybe some. And therefore we could not necessarily get an accurate measure of the student's math ability because of that construct irrelevant feature. Thank you, Brenda.
I want to add one thing as I think about math in particular. Sometimes students not having access to digital tools like the online calculator. If some of the concepts are like algebraic in nature, but may require some calculations, that could be a barrier. So if you know your learners still struggle with basic math, but the goal is to see if they understand some of those higher order thinking concepts, algebraic concepts, and providing that tool would give you a more accurate measurement of what they know, because they're not getting hung up on the basics, right? Because they have a tool to help them progress them to that, right? To that concept. So.
Thank you.
All right.
So as we think of evaluating assessment items, often the methods and or materials used in an assessment demand additional skills or understanding not directly connected to the construct. So even sometimes if we give students an assessment and there are long directions there on what they're supposed to do, if they struggle reading, there might be a barrier just within the instructions or the directions of what we're trying to ask our students to do. Right? So these construct irrelevant features can cause barriers, which in turn interfere with the measure because educators will not be able to make a correct interpretation of the student's knowledge of that construct. One thing within that video that really resonated with me that we didn't get to see is they talk about a student that was really struggling with spelling. And I taught the primary grade levels, and it talks about that the teacher realized that this student, and they actually showed the spelling test, and there may have been a processing disorder. We don't know for sure, but he struggled with the writing component of a spelling test. So the teacher then asked the student, can you just tell me, can you spell them out loud? And he spelled every single word correctly. And that really resonated with me as a first grade teacher and a second grade teacher, because spelling test is something that we give to our students weekly. And I have one student that really stands out to me that really struggled with the writing piece. We're not sure, if there was something in regard to processing that may have been going on, but writing was definitely a barrier for him. And I never thought to ask him, can you just spell these words to me? Because really my goal was, can he spell them, not can he write them? And the writing was a construct irrelevant feature that was getting in the way. And as I'm continuing to learn about UDL, that really, it kind of pierces my heart, right? Because you don't know what you don't know, and you're always trying to do your best. But I never thought about asking him to just say them out loud to me. That was an option I could have designed for him to really determine his understanding of whether or not he could meet the goal of spelling words. It was not about writing the words.
That's a great example, Jessica. I think writing is often a construct irrelevant feature that's included in a lot of assessments. If the goal is for me to tell you everything I know about a certain subject matter or a topic that we've been studying, let's say in history, and writing is the only means that I have to do that, it might limit my ability to do that. I also think, especially in these times, we need to sometimes re-examine or think about what writing actually means. We have so much access to tools now to assist us with getting communication out that it doesn't have to be the physical act of pen to paper writing anymore. And that's something I think worth asking ourselves. If writing is a requirement that we're embedding into any of our assessments, what is it exactly that I'm examining? That's come up a lot in our classroom discussions in the schools that we're working with across the project as well. So thanks for bringing that into the conversation.
Thank you, Sharon. And I appreciate we are in a post-COVID world where students now, even littles, have access to technology, and there are so many different applications and tools that are available to our students that where they could easily record themselves saying their spelling words. So it's the post-COVID world really has evolved into creating options for our students where they can demonstrate their learning in multiple ways. So thank you, Sharon, for touching on that. The next piece is we're going to actually go into evaluating assessments. And we are going to start small with thinking about evaluating individual items. And so as Brenda shared before, right, we might start by asking ourselves, is the question aligned to the learning goal? What barriers exist, including items that are construct irrelevant? And how can I create options to reduce these barriers? These are just some 3 questions that you might ask yourself as you're looking at individual items within an assessment. And now we're going to actually go into a couple different experiences. These are from real teachers that I have supported. And we're going to ask, what barriers might students experience? So this first example, on our screen, we actually have a little snip of a kindergarten benchmark. This has its 6 different problems, and they have little different counting objects inside like a square or rectangle. And the goal of this is for students count and answer how many. And the directions to the teacher is to read, students are to count the items and tell how many. So you're just supposed to ask them how many, and this is on a piece of paper. So I want you to think, are there any construct relevant features here within this particular question? And what barriers might students experience when they're interacting with this particular benchmark and these questions here?
Hey, Jessica, it's Shamron again. The first one that pops into my mind is, what if I can't see what's on the page?
Exactly. Look at Nadine also said visual or fine motor and it difficult. And I love this. And that is exactly what the teacher, this kindergarten teacher, identified. And she was already designing options for her students. She said, these items are so small within such a small little square that it was hard for some of her students to do that one-to-one correspondence of counting them. So she would actually get manipulatives and help them there. But thank you, Shamron. And those also visual or fine motor, right? If I cannot physically see this, that is hard because it is very, very small.
I
So
loved Christina's comment about children may be able to count, but not know how to write their numbers.
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. Are we asking them to be able to write the number or just tell us how many, right? Thank you very much. And so let's go to the next slide. So for you, I would like for you to add in the chat, what options can be designed to reduce the barriers? Some of the barriers that we just talked about. What options might you design to help have students access or universally design this particular question? I'm gonna go ahead and go to the chat. I think I shared one too. Provide closer visuals like paper, hard copy. Yes. Thank you. I gave the example too. The teacher was already just providing actual tangible manipulatives that they could count.
I would also consider language. If instructions are only given in English and instructions are only done orally, we might miss out on some of that as well. So how might we support language in this aspect as well? Oh, I love Christina writes show with their fingers how many, contrasting colors, choice of what to count, multiple choice answers from which one to choose.
Yes, these are all great. Those are great designing options that we could provide for this particular problem.
And I think, we're using a kindergarten example, but a lot of these strategies that we're talking about to make them more accessible would transfer to, I would think, any grade level, age level assessment.
And Jessica, I'm also imagining a digital option where kids can drag over the items. So as they count them, maybe they move them over if they're struggling with their writing skills.
Yep, that's a great option. And I love the contrasting colors too, right? That's a great option as well for some of my students that might have visual impairment. The contrasting colors might make it easier for them to see. Also, the teacher that had originally created this, although she was already creating options by allowing them to count tangible like manipulatives, she was also going to recreate the assessment to make these items a lot larger. She said this is just too small. We're thinking of littles that are still trying to touch physical pieces. So they were going to have an option if they wanted to use the paper or if they wanted to use counting objects or, and then we also talked about, well, what is the goal? Do they need to write the number or can they tell you the number? Being very explicit about what is the goal here that we're trying to identify. So thank you, Brenda. We can go ahead and go to our next example. Thank you for those that participated in the chat. And this example here really, really resonates with me as a prior first grade teacher because this is a world that I lived in. So this is a weekly first grade weekly assessment. And here's the goal. The goal is to retell stories, including key details and demonstrate understanding of their central message or the lesson. The instructions to the student are look at page 95 through 96 in Whistle for Willie. Why does Peter get under the box this time? Use details from the selection to support your answer. Okay, so on the very bottom, it tells teachers, students are to write their answer. They get 2 points for details and 2 points for grammar. Okay, so this is a question where students have to write out their response. So I'm going to ask you, I want you to think about, are there any constructly relevant features? And what barriers might students experience in this particular question?
Yeah, Makala, I'm sorry if I'm not saying it correctly. Makala says grammar is irrelevant here. Does their reading level allow them to read independently? Having to read the story from Christina and Nadine. Written versus oral from Richard. I love that. Often, yeah, we talked about it earlier, writing as the concept, as embedding the writing as a part of the assessment when you're not assessing writing. Yeah, speaking or another expression can do the same thing. Or in another language, right? I'm thinking about that as well. Tell me all the things that you can tell me.
Exactly.
Knowledge of prepositional phrases. Ooh, organization of text. Great example from Christina there.
Even students being able to navigate to page 95 to 96 of their book. So here they actually have an assessment and then they have their anthology. And this resonated with me because this is how we assessed our students. I was like, oh, we must have had similar curriculum and we must have been using, the end of week assessment. And again, like I said, this just pierced my heart, right? Thinking like, oh, there were so many other ways that I could have, or options I could have designed, right, to help eliminate some of these barriers or even these constructively relevant features. Writing, this isn't about writing, this is about being able to retell. So do they have to do it through writing? Grammar is definitely a constructively relevant feature because that has nothing to do with the retelling. That's its own separate goal. So yes, identifying what key details mean, right? Exactly. What does that mean to students? So, might there be other words that we might be able to use even in the directions that we give our students? So thank you. Thank you for those of you that shared. So as we think of some of these constructively relevant features, I also want you to think of some of those barriers. And on the next slide in the chat, I would love to hear what options can be designed to reduce some of these barriers that you guys talked about. And I feel like this is the world where technology at times is really beneficial, maybe for some of our students. There's a great app called Seesaw that could really help some of our kiddos where they could easily retell orally as opposed to have to do this through writing. Reading the selection aloud as a class. Thank you.
Image sharing, highlighting text, speech to text, text to speech, communication boards. I love all of that.
And yes, Jake, we will be able to share the slide deck with you. It'll be in our home.
It's popping in right now. I'm about to put it back in the chat.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yep, text to speech, communication. Also providing them the pages, not having them to find 95, 96. Imagine the anxiety of her student that is still struggling with their numbers to try to find and shuffle through all those pages. Might we all find it together and read that page together, read that little section, because it's really about them just being able to retell those key details to us. It's not really even about reading, it's about them being able to take that information and do something with it. So I appreciate that. Allow students to highlight details in their text. Yes, I love that. And if it's their anthology books, right, might we make a copy of it, or might we put it in Seesaw where they could highlight and maybe break the different paragraphs down, because that is 2 pages of text. That could be a lot of text for some of our kiddos. Might we allow them the option to listen to it being read to them again as they're maybe retelling as well? Yes, allow students to present or write multimodal ways to express. I appreciate that. Thank you. So like I said, this example really resonated with me as well because this was something that my students experienced weekly, right? And as we get very intentional with designing our assessments and looking at the individual items and really asking ourselves, what are we trying to find out here? What is our goal? And what construct irrelevant features might pose barriers, and how can maybe we design options to reduce those barriers? Allow to type. Yes, I love that. Yes, we talked about the pages, right? If they have to look through 94 irrelevant pages, we are wasting their time. And that could provide, I mean, that gives me anxiety for thinking about a student that might be struggling with trying to find the pages as I see all of my other maybe friends already there and maybe already writing. So thank you for that. And we have one more example here. Our next example is going to be a 5th grade math assessment. And Brenda, I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about this one for a little bit.
Sure. All right. So here is a math assessment here. So the goal here is students can find volume of a figure, right? So what is the volume of the figure shown below? So take a look at this and see, answer the questions. Are there any construct or relevant features? What barriers might students experience? I'll give you a moment to look at that before I add my thoughts here.
Can you describe the image?
Oh, yes, sorry. Let me describe the image here. So this is an image. So students are asked to find the volume. And so you see a stack of cubes. You see on the very left part of the screen, it's a 3x4 by 2 stack of cubes. And then of course, as you move to the right, there's another figure there, a 2x2 by 6 figure stacked blocks, and they're together. And so the students have to find the volume of this figure here. So as you think about that, are there any construct irrelevant features? Do you see any barriers that students might experience? And feel free to put it in the chat here. I love that. Can be visually distracting. So as I think about that comment there, students may not have the imagination required to count all the blocks. It would appear, so if you think about volume, it's all of those blocks count. Students would go about counting those blocks. That's an elementary way of looking at it, right? So if students are looking at this visual from this angle, they might miss some blocks because of it being cut off in terms of vision. So I love that. Vision, there's minimal contrast. I can barely see the dots. Yep.
What does even volume mean? Like,
Okay.
like I see this for me and I'm like, nope, nope.
Yeah, so let me explain
Tapping
this.
out.
Let me provide some more scaffold. So basically the volume here would make up, if you take each of those cubes, the collection of those cubes, students would have to count them to see what would make up the actual figure, right?
No,
So-
that was just my emotional reaction to.
Oh, okay.
No, you're good,
I'm-
Brenda. Thank you though.
I'm running a tutoring session here, sorry.
No,
And-
but
and
from a learner experience, if I'm
Yeah.
looking at this, computational concerns, and then from me as a user or a learner in this, like I'm going to count everything that I see, but what am I not seeing, and how am I going to keep track of what I counted, and what is this actually telling me? Like,
Yeah, so there's a lot of visual pieces here, like in terms of visual support is lacking, right? And so most students would be unable to appropriately capture the answer to this question unless they had, again, the imagination to know that, okay, there's blocks here that aren't showing, and they would count those in their head, but it's still a lot to work with, right? Because again, we want kids to be able to easily access this question by being able to find the volume. And unfortunately, for students who are still like working toward that learning goal, that could like really throw them off, right? Not seeing it completely. Let me see, are there any others? Fine motor, computational concerns. Yep, it'd be hard to track those blocks. Yep, very good. All right, so what options can be designed to reduce the barriers? So what would be an option you would think could work if you were having to figure out this problem for yourself? You can reflect on yourself as a learner, right? It sounds like Sham had some ideas, right? She would
Well,
need
I need to hold it in my hands.
yeah, right. Okay. What would
Yeah,
be,
for sure. Give me a model, give me something to touch. Show me what
yes,
you mean. Give me a different representation of volume besides cubes. I think in the real world, we're not necessarily measuring volume with um rectangles and squares.
right.
Christina, yeah, contrasting colors. That would be really helpful. Yeah.
So I would also want to add here, this is a question that's also asked of students in high school, right? Um, I think that, and I would hope that at the elementary level, students have blocks to be able to recreate these figures so that they can count them, right? If they needed to touch them, like having that manipulative. But that option would also work if this was in a high school geometry class where this concept comes up again, right? So we again think of options being elementary, but not really, right? If students are struggling again with visual issues or just imagining across this figure, like imagining what's there, even though it's not showing directly, that is a good option as well. Just thinking about elementary and high school level students.
Yeah,
grappling with
this
concept.
makes me think of the use of tools in classrooms and how
Yeah.
often we have conversations with educators that might hold back and think that you have to have an IEP or a 504 plan in order to use a specific tool. And so this come up a lot in recent discussions with who has access to all of the tools in our classrooms, and are we teaching everybody about how to use all the tools? Can they access them when they need them? And are we providing, you talked earlier, Brenda, when you were referencing the guidelines about the importance of frequent and timely feedback. So that opportunity to pause and reflect in using the tools that I'm including in my assessments for students to use. How does that tool work for you? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Sometimes we see people forced to use certain things in assessments that just don't make sense for them. So kind of pushing a pause on that and being really intentional about tools and making sure that we're providing them and teaching them to everybody so that we're not stigmatizing using tools as an issue in the classroom.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. And the teacher that brought this assessment, that was one piece that she identified was we have these tools, but they're not like easily accessible. And how do we find ways where we put them on their desk so if they need them, they can grab them and they don't have to stand up and walk across the room. They're easily accessible for them to grab and they also know how to use them.
Yeah. All right, so moving on, I know we're getting close to time. So I think, Jessica, you wanted to share some next steps?
Just some possible next steps as we think about, or as you think about, well, where might I start? So I just share, start small, pick a specific assessment that you can go through to analyze and just ask yourself, is the question aligned to the learning goal? What barriers exist, including items that are construct irrelevant? And then how can I create options to reduce these barriers? So just ask yourself those questions, or even as you're creating your own assessments, what is my goal? And are there any construct irrelevant features here? And if so, might those features pose barriers? And if so, how might I provide some options just to reduce those barriers?
All right, so to close us out, if you can in the chat or to yourself as you reflect on the ideas that have been shared today, what has affirmed your thinking and pushed your thinking? And then while you're doing that, I want to announce the next webinar. So I'm hoping you can join us, and it is on supporting executive function. That's November 12th. We're also going to try something new because we've received some feedback from you regarding the webinar and just needing more additional support. So we're going to begin adding an additional 30 minutes at the end of the upcoming webinars for additional support regarding UDL, for more Q&A and so forth. So anything UDL, we plan to provide that time for you. And then before you head out, if you can follow the QR code or the link and respond to the 4 questions. We love your feedback. We act on that feedback. One example being extending the webinar to address additional questions regarding UDL. So we would really appreciate hearing from you how we can improve this experience, what you liked about the experience, things like that. That we can take into consideration as we move forward to the upcoming webinars.
Yeah, looking forward to that November session and the Q&A afterwards. We're looking forward to sharing more resources, universal resources that are available on our website, having some Q&A and some workshop time at the end. We realize the limitations of a live webinar. Sometimes we don't get to see your faces and have those conversations, and the chat isn't always the best place to get everything out. So we're really looking forward to having folks join us in November. We've dropped the registration link in the chat for you, and then feedback, to quote my friend James McKenna, feedback is a gift. We really take it to heart, and we use your feedback that you provide for us in the design of our upcoming sessions. So thank you all for joining us today. Great to meet everybody. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next month. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or any needs. We'd love to engage with you to support your work moving forward. Thank you to Jessica and Brenda as well. Great design today.
Thank you.
You can't see Elisa, but she's clapping over here.
Thank you, Shan.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.